Good morning, friends. Good to be with you. Hit the book here, and there we go. Perfect. So yeah, last time we started chapter 14, looking at the anointing, the betrayal, and the Passover and Last Supper. I've seen a number of things this week and had some conversations that I thought might actually go back and be retrospectively helpful. That is, there's now, and I know for a long time at Holy Innocents, there was a tradition of having the Seder and using a Haggadah for that. And those are great. There's some debate about should Christians be doing Seders or not, which I think is legitimate. Of course, at least for the last one we did, we had Rabbi Brad come over and lead it for us, and as purely a Jewish expression, not as a Christian typology that gets laid on top of it. But the interesting thing was, and this is just to name, that the current expression of a Seder and of the Haggadah were all written about 300 AD, well after Jesus's time. So when people go, oh, it was a Seder on Maundy, Thursday, is not true in any sense of what is used today, because all that came well after Jesus, right? Most likely, the Seders, or at least those Passover meals that were shared, were more temple-centric, that you would get your lamb from the temple, or you would offer your lamb at the temple. There's a whole different way of doing things when there was a temple present, which of course there was in Jesus's time. So it's not to say that it's wrong that it was a Passover meal. It's just that what we understand in a modern sense is not what Jesus was likely doing in a ancient sense. Does that make sense? So anyway, it's just to name it. We can't really unpack it because we don't have records of what it would have looked like before around 200 or 300 AD. Anyway, so now we'll go on to chapter 14, which is everybody leaving supper. So when they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus said to them, you will well become deserters, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go. Wait, did I miss something? No, that's right. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. Peter said to him, even though all become deserters, I will not. Jesus said to him, truly, I tell you this day, this very night, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But he said vehemently, even though I must die with you, I will not deny you. And all of them said the same. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. He took with him Peter and James and John and began to be distressed and agitated. And he said to them, I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and keep awake. And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, and not what I want, but what you want. He came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep awake 1 hour? Keep awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. And again, he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And once more he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to say to him. And he came a third time and said to them, are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Enough. The hour has come, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. All right, so first, we have Jesus's prediction of the denial and the desertion that the disciples will all run. He had a previous conversation about betrayal, right? These are a little bit separated in Mark versus Matthew and Luke, which have them right next to each other. I will be denied and betrayed are pretty much the same sentence. It's a little broken up, but it's not substantively different. And of course, all the men ultimately do abandon him, right? The prediction is accurate. And yes, ultimately the women do as well, except for maybe that very inner group. There's 2 or 3 recorded at the foot of the cross, right? There's at one point there was one critic I was reading that said, "Oh, except for the women." And I was like, well, 3 of the women, not not all of the women. It's not like there were 50 women at the foot of the cross bravely in that moment. You really only have just a handful that are able to be at the end. And even then, we don't know if they were with Jesus every step of the way, if they sort of disappeared and then showed up at the end. The way Mark describes it, they all leave. So then we have the anguished prayer. And it gets underplayed. Jesus is anguished. He is terrified. Mark is super clear about that. As Placker notes, the verb is much more dramatic. Jesus threw himself on the ground is much more akin to the way that verb is written, not just, oh, he fell down or he sort of got down on his knees to pray. Like, no, he dramatically threw himself down, prostrating himself in front of God in the midst of this terrible situation, knowing that he is to die, right? It is dramatic, it is terrible, and it's supposed to be. So let's also be clear, this was not the appropriate way to approach death then or now. We all have this sort of ideal of the stoic, resigned, dignified person in accepting our fate, right? Like Socrates bravely drank the poison that he didn't hide or cry or cower in fear or dread. Warriors go into battle standing up and being brave and all those kinds of things, right? That's this sort of idealized way of approaching death, but that is not what we have with Jesus. I'm not saying that Jesus is less because of it. I'm just saying it is different, and there's a lot of people who really want Jesus or will massage this moment to be less dramatic because they want him to be braver, right? But wrestling with God and the plan is not what is expected, and I would argue it is wonderful. I think it's a powerful of Jesus. The other side of it, we have to name why a lot of people get really upset. I may talk about this later, but I want to talk about it here. The reason a lot of people get upset too are the theologians say, well, if Jesus is in charge and he is God, then he shouldn't fear death because he knows what will happen and he knows what comes next and all those kinds of things. And so a lot of the people who protest the most are actually theologians wanting Jesus, quite frankly, to be more God than man. If you want, that's sort of, for me, I think that's a big portion of this tension is, well, we want Jesus either to be braver or we want Jesus to be more godlike, one of the two. Of course, in the midst of that prayer, he says, not my will, but your will be done, right? Now, this is an incredibly problematic verse, not because Jesus said it, but because how it gets interpreted as God demands Jesus to die and Jesus has to submit, right? That's how it gets portrayed. Like, oh, well, I guess if I'm going to die, I give up. It's your will, God, kind of model, right? That's how we've interpreted it. I don't know if that's how Jesus meant it. That is, my faith and theology are clear that the Romans killed Jesus, not God commanding it, right? That the people who actually enact violence on Jesus is a combination of power brokers who are uncomfortable with a God who loves God's people and wants to raise up the poor and the hungry and the lost, which isn't too dissimilar from many conversations we will have 21 centuries later, quite frankly, right? As soon as you start talking about caring for the poor and the hungry and the lost, lots of people in power and with money get very anxious about, does that change position? All that said, I think Borg and Crossan help with this the most. They say the prayer is not a fatalistic resignation to the will of God, but trusting in God in the midst of the most dire of circumstances. Okay, so it's not, I give up, God, whatever you want, but I trust that your will is going to do better things for the world than what I understand right now. That's a different way of trusting in God than a I give up kind of model, right? It's a deep statement of faith if we talk about it the way Borg and Crossan talk about it. If we just sort of do this I give up and they're going to kill me kind of thing, well, then that's a different conversation. What do y'all think? What do y'all think about that? I do think it's critical because these verses have been used to justify people giving up in some pretty terrible circumstances. Oh, you're being abused. Well, Jesus was killed and he gave up. That's God's will kind of thing. It's a weird, some really bad pastoral theology has been born out of these statements. But what do y'all think? I don't think that's how it, I am more of a Borg and Crossan fan, clearly, on that interpretation, but maybe you hear it differently. What do y'all think about your will be done?
I've always thought about it as having to, without putting enough thought into it, as having to think Jesus has to die on the cross and it has to unfold this way. But maybe it didn't have to unfold that way.
Yeah.
And as a side note, I think the anguish, even though you might know intellectually what's coming after death, doesn't mean you want to go through the agony of experiencing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, he was still human at the point of being put up on the cross. He was still human at the point of the nails and of the thorns and all of that. And, you know, I wouldn't want to go through all of that, even if I did know what was coming after.
The Message has some really powerful statements from Jesus in Peterson's paraphrase. Mm-hmm. One of the first ones says, Jesus told them, "You're all going to feel that your world is falling apart and that it's my fault." That's his paraphrase of "you'll all become deserters." Nice. And then after they get to Gethsemane, it says, he plunged into a sinkhole of dreadful agony. He told them, "I feel bad enough right now to die. Stay here and keep vigil with me." Then it says, going a little ahead, he fell to the ground and prayed for a way out. "Papa, Father, you can't you? Get me out of this? Take this cup away from me. But please, not what I want. What do you want?" Yeah, so I think the latter one, you know, certainly gets at the faith, right? The trusting whatever you want, Father. I'm in, if that's what it is. No matter, you know, how much I don't want to do it.
I think that this is a perfect example of the relationship of Jesus to God. It's like a child to his parent. Okay, can I please go? No. Okay, and I mean, that's basically how I interpret this, and I love it because this is probably the most human Jesus we experience in the Gospels.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, like I said, I don't have a problem at all with Jesus wrestling and struggling in prayer and fear and dread of what's to come, especially if he knows what's to come. And let's be clear, this is not a moment of otherworldly power, right? Of great ability to see the future kind of thing. The Romans killed thousands of people a year. Hundreds of thousands they put on crosses. I mean, it was a public form of torture designed to scare the loving God out of anyone who opposed them. There are regular records that say that there were countless crosses going onto the roads, into the roads of every major Roman city across the ancient world, right? Of people who had been determined to be insurrectionists or opposers of Caesar. And so they were put up there for all to see. So I don't think it really takes a third sight for Jesus to know, if I'm going to say God is in charge and that I am God, then I'm going to be put on a cross. He knew what that, like, he knew both what it looked like and what it would probably be like. So again, it's completely a human moment that be like any of us saying, like, I don't want to be put in an electric chair. It's not a mystery that certain things are going to lead to certain things. So yeah, that was sort of the question. Final note, I don't honestly worry about this again. I said theologians don't like this portrayal of Jesus. They want him in charge, dignified, even detached. It's that sort of weird when you watch some of those movies like King of Kings, you have an ascetic kind of almost completely apart Jesus that just sort of walks along and is barely engaged with anybody he meets. But if you pay attention at all to Mark's gospel, it's the opposite. He's deeply connected to the people he meets. He is deeply caring and compassionate. It is not this guy who sort of walks undisturbed through the hubbub of the world. It's a guy disturbed by what's happening in the world and wants to make it better, right? It's someone passionate about what's happening. So if we have that view of him throughout his life, then we aren't surprised at the end of his life that he's equally passionate about dying, right? But it's how do you view that process to get to this? But it always comes back to that same idea: is Jesus more God than man, or more man than God? And I can handle it that he's more, at least expresses plenty of human emotions. I can deal with that tension of the humanity of Jesus being in conflict at times with the all-knowing power of God at the same time, right? Maybe it's not an issue for y'all either, but it's just a name that's the issue for a lot of folks.
We didn't talk much about the betrayal of disciples, but I just think it's in the entire gospel according to Mark. Okay, the disciples do not look very good.
Right. No, they never look good.
No.
And we should not be surprised when they run. No.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. What else should we expect, right?
Yeah. Jesus says, I'm pretty sure you guys are going to run because you've done it before, more or less, right? You don't get it at half what I'm saying. So no surprise. Which we can go back and talk about the betrayal. That's one of those for me. Or the denial for Peter, right? It's sort of it's what it is. I don't know. We can engage it more, but it's definitely fits, like you said, in that portrayal of the disciples never catching on.
Yep.
Wouldn't this have been a great place when Jesus is praying to God for God to have said something back that is recorded? I mean,
yeah,
Jesus was baptized. He said, "This is my beloved son," right? But we'd only hear one side of the conversation. So I wonder if God said something to him that calmed him, or encouraged him. He says, "This is, I'll do your will." I'm just sort of thinking.
No, it'd be nice. It'd be nice.
Well, he's just been anointed.
True.
But who would have heard it besides Jesus? That's
right.
Well,
okay.
We do have to name
the disciples were all asleep. Disciples are asleep and everything. He's alone, and it's his, so yeah. Who's going to be there to hear
what Jesus said, though? Who recorded his prayer?
That's what I was going to say. It is a wonder. I love the story of Gethsemane, and I also know that by Mark's own account, everybody was asleep. Jesus was off talking to God by himself. So how do we know
How do we know what he said? Right.
what he said, right? And in a minute, we'll talk about the trial, and the trial is the same thing. Like all the disciples flee, and it's Jesus and the Sanhedrin, and you go, how do they know what the Sanhedrin said or what Jesus said if all of the people, including Mark, ran away, right? I mean, so there's a number of these stories that I'm happy to accept on faith. But if you were talking from a strict sort of like, I don't know, news reporting standard issue, like, wait, you don't have an eyewitness and you don't have a corroborating witness, I don't think you could actually put this in the news article, right? Or at least that's the way the news used to work. I don't know if it matters anymore.
You trying to say this wouldn't hold up in court, Bill?
No, no, it wouldn't.
Hearsay, objection.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
All right. Well, we'll look at the next section immediately. Euthus, the old word, comes back again. While he was still speaking, Judas of the 12 arrived, and with him there was a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." So when he came, he went up to him at once and said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. And they laid hands on him and arrested him. But one of those who stood near drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to them, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a bandit? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not. But let the scriptures be fulfilled." All of them deserted him and fled. And a certain young man was following him, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. They caught hold of him, but he left the linen cloth and ran off naked. All right.
I have never understood the purpose of that story.
Yeah, we'll talk through that for sure.
Yeah, okay. I just never understood that. Why is that there?
Why on earth is that there? Yes. Amen. Amen. So we have the betrayal and the arrest. We have the kiss, Jesus' accepting response, and the arrest itself, right? There's no commentator, no one says anything other than obviously the kiss is always a sign of intimacy and of love and respect, and it's being twisted. That's an obvious sort of response and interpretation. It's a pretty horrible way to portray your friend. Oh, hey, you'll know which one it is when I give him a kiss. And he's going to accept it in love and compassion, which that's the bigger surprise in many ways, is that even though Jesus is pretty fully aware that Judas is betraying him, he still accepts that kiss and sort of goes along with this process, right? I mean, because he could certainly resist. He could order his disciples to resist. He could order his disciples to lie in ambush for the whole crowd that's coming after him, right? I mean, there's lots of ways that other leaders throughout history would have handled this. Jesus's choice to accept is a different one, to say the least.
I mean, Jesus could have gone someplace else other than Gethsemane too, right?
Absolutely. He could have saw Judas go off with some folks and said, "You know what? Today I'm going to pray over in the Kidron Valley," right? I mean,
exactly. Okay. Yeah.
all of those. Yes. In other gospels, it's much more clear who, but in this case, someone cuts off someone's ear. Right? We have the name in the Gospel of John, we get the name, and in other cases we have the name of the person who cut off the ear. I mean, like, Peter does it, I think, in Matthew. You have all these sort of other details, but in Mark's gospel, you pretty much just get like, someone cut off somebody's ear, trying to basically stop this moment from happening, which appears, and I agree with the commentators, right, that this is probably reporting a fact more than a symbolic detail, right? It's not a oh, well, they cut off his ear because this person wouldn't hear Jesus's word or something like that. It's probably just that's what happened. One of the disciples or one of the Jesus's followers said, "Let's defend him," and jumped out a little too soon and was rebuked by Jesus, and then the man's healed, right? I mean, kind of thing. So but it's just to name it as probably that reporting of fact. I don't see symbolism there, and no commentator I really saw or have read there was some sort of deep symbolic act. You could maybe find it. So now we'll go to Stefan's part, right? Then we have the man and linen running away naked, right? Placker goes exhaustively through, I think it's either 4 or 5 options for who the man might be and why does he run away and all these kinds of details. And none of them are great. And Placker says that. He goes through all 4 or 5 of these ideas. Oh, it could be this, it could be that. And every single time he goes, but that's probably not likely, right? But that's not probably likely either. They're all ideas. They're all options for what could be going on. I liked his assessment that it is perhaps in the same way that the man's ear gets cut off. It might just be another detail of what actually happened, right? It could just be this weird thing of like, and this really weird moment happened. This dude ran away naked, right? I mean, like there was chaos and somebody's ear got cut off and another guy ran away naked. What was happening that, like sort of just showing that utter chaos of this moment, right? Because it's also a moment where the disciples flee, right? It's not only the man in the linen garment who runs away, it's everybody runs away. Guys show up with guns or clubs or knives and everybody starts going, uh-oh, I'm out. I am out, right? I think it's probably one of those details, but this might have a particular literary point. I didn't see anybody say it, but for me, when I read this, it has a little bit more of that, which is whatever is about to happen to Jesus, people knew it was so bad that you'd rather run away naked than wait and see what's going to happen. Right? That for me, that's sort of what it says. Like, it doesn't matter, first century or 21st century, you got to be in a really bad situation to say it's better off for me to run away naked than to hang out and get my clothes back. Right? I mean, no one does that at any point in time unless they go, it's better to get out of here, start naked and figure something out later than to have to deal with the authorities, with these guys with guns and knives or whatever else they got, right? In this case, spears and torches in the middle of the night, like, I'm out of here. I am out of here. I don't know what else is happening. So it could just be, like I said, a literary point that is making that emphasis / the emphasis of the overall chaos of everybody just really wanting to get away and pointing that, combined with it could just be that idea of an actual event that happened that doesn't have any deeper meaning than like, hey, remember when Craig had to run away naked because he wanted to get out of there so bad? Like that's it, right? There's no more nuance to it other than that's what happened. I don't know. We can certainly engage it more, and I could even grab the book here. It's right next to me and read some of those options, but none of them are really super worth reporting because they all were sort of these goofy, very symbolic, very idealized kind of things that you sort of go, I mean, maybe, but not really.
I just have trouble seeing any reason that that's even there, but that's just me.
Yeah, why you don't edit that out, right?
Yeah, but it's okay. I mean, I can live with it. I'm just wondering what's this? In addition to that, I also want to know, when did the disciples start carrying swords?
Yes.
The world may never know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Nowhere else do I hear the disciples having weapons of any sort. And all of a sudden, here we go, and there's swords that come out, right? Come on. Help me out.
Well, and you never know. I mean, they could have grabbed the sword from one of the guys who brought the sword. There's all kinds of weird things that you can question, but I do think it does speak ultimately to the chaos in any of these situations, right? When authorities show up in a situation and they're there for bad intent, it always equals chaos, right? Whether we're watching it in terms of the Ukraine and that sort of conflict, or just somebody's trying to arrest the bad guy, right? Who wants to get away. those kinds of situations happen over and over again. I think it is in that regard an accurate portrayal by Mark of just,
Right.
oh,
The care.
wait, our leader just got attacked and taken away. Like, I mean, yeah, that would, all kinds of stuff's got to go down.
The footnotes in my study Bible make the point that Mark is the only version of that story in which Jesus does not rebuke the disciple who cuts off the ear.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think you get a extremely realistic portrayal. I mean, he's at this point, he's pretty desperate. As far as who the young man is, I mean, I've heard people say that there's tradition that, the young man was Mark.
Right. That was one of the interpretations. We don't have that with any more detail than the rest, but that's one of those options. Yeah.
I think the footnotes make a couple of interesting points. And one is that it can be a metaphor for the disciples, and they've all been exposed before the authorities of the world and rendered, ultimately impotent against the authorities of the world. There's also the point that the young man, we get another, so this is the young man who runs away scared. We've got another young man who greets the women at the tomb, in chapter 6, just a little after this.
Yeah. I mean, so I was just looking it up. Placker's comments then are around, that the young man was Mark himself, sort of in a Alfred Hitchcock puts himself in the show kind of thing, but nothing in the text either accounts for or against that, right? So it could be, but it doesn't necessarily. That was Placker's response to that. Like you said, then there is the word used for young man is the same as the mysterious young man that shows up with the white garments in the tomb to announce that Jesus is no longer there. But it's sort of weird because you're like, I thought that was an angel, or there was an implication there that it was sort of an angel, but maybe this was an angel observing the other moment. I don't know. It's sort of a weird, it's a bit of a stretch just because you use like young man does not necessarily mean anything other than he's a young man. It's not a particularly descriptive or a rarely used word for that. But it is, he mentions that as well. Then the other ones that he mentioned, just to name it, right, was so the ones that you mentioned there. And then there was one that a literary critic, Frank Kermode, says it could be sort of like in James Joyce's Ulysses. He intentionally had the man in the Macintosh as a raincoat that he would put in different books. And it was pretty much an author joke, like, oh, y'all are going to look for meaning in everything, so I'm just going to put in an extra detail to drive you nuts, kind of thing for Joyce. And so Kermode claims that this could be what Mark was doing, except for that doesn't seem to be Mark to me, and that's what also Placker says. That doesn't seem to fit with who Mark has been up to this point. He's very precise about so much else. It seems weird for him to put in a joke at this serious moment, but maybe, who knows? Again, he just sort of talked about each of those, but said, well, none of them, you can't discount them, but you can't really embrace them either. It's much more of a faith question, I guess, about who is that man, and the man running away naked.
I like one of the things that Peterson does in the dialogue just before the gang arrives, when he rebukes the disciples. He says, "Are you going to sleep all night? No, you slept long enough." I mean, enough is the word that appears in NRSV, but it's, this way it's as if Jesus is sort of saying, you've been sleeping this whole time, my whole way to Jerusalem, and you're still, it's, we got to get going, guys. You missed it.
It's a good one. I like that. Yeah, enough is not like the I'm exhausted with you. It's just, oh, you've slept enough. It's a different connotation of that word, but I like it. All right. Any other thoughts on the arrest? Judas, the naked man, any of these things that we've looked at? All right. So we'll look at the next little section here real fast before we finish. So they took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes were assembled. And Peter had followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he was sitting with the guards, warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many gave false testimony against him, and their testimony did not agree. Some stood up and gave false testimony against him, saying, "We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands." But even on this point, their testimony did not agree. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, "Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" But he was silent and did not answer. Again, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Jesus said, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power and coming with the clouds of heaven." And the high priest tore his clothes and said, "Why do we still need witnesses? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision?" And all of them condemned him as deserving death. Some began to spit on him, to blindfold him, and to strike him, saying to him, "Prophesy." The guards also took him over and beat him. So, like I said earlier, Borg and Crossan clearly name everyone has fled at this point. It's Jesus and the group, so it's hard to know exactly what happened with the trial, right? Like, who's telling the story? Maybe there were followers in the Sanhedrin. John claims there was, or that there were several, but we don't get that in Mark. So it's hard to know exactly how we got this info. Because Mark said that all fled. So what can factually be known about this moment? Nothing. It might be the story that was been told, but we don't know exactly how we got it, any more than we know what happened in Gethsemane. And so while we don't know, we also don't know if this is a formal trial or a hearing or something else altogether. There's some scholars that spend a lot of time to go, oh, Jews weren't allowed to have a trial at night without observers. They weren't allowed to do this without at least 3 witnesses agreeing. They couldn't even bring charges, and they'll reference the Mishnah, which is a collection of Jewish laws and interpretations. But here's the key. The Mishnah was written 200 years after Jesus, and the rules were likely different in First Temple Judaism. So it's yet another case of we don't exactly know what the rules were for conducting a trial or a hearing or a simple interrogation, right? We don't know. We don't know exactly what's going on here, other than clearly the authorities, the Jewish authorities, are trying to find a reason to get rid of Jesus, which we already know has been going on for the last 2 chapters, right? They've already been looking for a way to kill Jesus. Now they're trying to finalize that. That's all part of the story. We just don't know exactly what this particular thing means, especially if you were to ask Marcy as an attorney and judge, it would be we have nothing that formalized here at all, either in the process of how they're doing this interrogation, or we don't know of the rules of how it would have been operated or run, right? And so it's a name that it's most likely more of a show trial regardless than it is any attempt to get to the truth as we understand it now. The trial ultimately begins with a total inability to figure out what Jesus did that is so wrong. And hey, no one knows who Jesus is, which is the most marking thing that can happen in this entire situation, right? No one knows who the heck Jesus is. The disciples don't know. The crowds don't know. The leaders don't know. It is the Markan secret, right? Or the messianic secret of Mark. Even Jesus, if someone says, "Oh, you're the Messiah, you're the Son of the Living One," right? The demons say it, and he goes, "Don't tell anybody. Don't know. I mean, shut up." He's very clear that he doesn't want that information out there. Even when someone begins to hint at it, he shuts it all down, right? So this fits in with the entire Markan approach. Who is Jesus? We don't know. And of course, you get to the trial and they can't even begin to guess themselves. Until Jesus declares, "I am," ego, eimi, which can mean two things. Actually, it can mean three things. It can mean he agrees, I am yes, I am the Messiah, right? I agree to be the Messiah. It's also the name of God, right? The great I am, ego, eimi. For that matter, in Greek, you can also read it as, "Oh, am I?" Kind of a response, like a sort of snarky, am I? You say so kind of thing, right? Which is more of what we hear in Luke's gospel. That's how Luke chooses to interpret those words, adding a little bit of a phrase like, "Oh, you say that I am," right? Kind of situation that gets pushed out. Or is that John? I have to look at all those details. But anyway, in other gospels, it is less clear. However, in this case, because Jesus says, "I am, and you will see me on the clouds in great powers," seems to be much more of that confession of, yes, I am the Messiah, right? So Placker then has this great quote that I think is completely accurate. It is the climax of this gospel, the Gospel of Mark. "All the good reasons for concealing his identity have come to an end. There's no danger he'll be mistaken for a great political military leader, successful by the world standards, when he is a prisoner being prepared for execution. He can finally speak the truth. That he does so makes clear that he's still oddly in charge. Whatever Judas or the council or Pilate do, the moment when Jesus is first condemned flows out of Jesus's own choice." Right? So it is this sacred moment of Jesus finally revealing who he is. The great question that flows through every ounce of Mark finally appears here, and it is supposed to be profound and breathtaking. And let's be honest, Jesus definitely condemns himself with his response. He could have said nothing, and with no one agreeing on the charges, no one agreeing on what's going on, they could walk right out the door, right? He could have walked right away without a problem. They might have beaten him or caused trouble, but they could not. It seems the way even Mark is describing it, they could not condemn him without much more information, right? So again, this is the most definitive explanation we have in the whole book of who Jesus is, and it comes from Jesus, right? So we can't argue, "Oh, well, maybe he was this." It's not the chief priest. It's not Peter. It's not some other human saying this. This is Jesus making the declaration about himself. And then other gospels put those words in the mouths of others, right? It's Peter who confesses and says, "Oh, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Oh, Peter, good for you," kind of moment. The Gospel of Mark is, no, it's only Jesus who says this, and therefore that has much more authority than what we try to haltingly call God or call Jesus, right? What do y'all think? Other thoughts on that? On the trial or on Jesus's declaration? Both.
Well, the footnotes in the study Bible are kind of interesting on this. It says, "I am" would be an uncharacteristic answer for Jesus. It stands in sharp contrast with his answer to Pilate in chapter 15, verse 2, "You say so."
Right.
And both Matthew and Luke say, "You say," parenthetically, "that I am."
Right.
Which suggests that Mark 14:62, this verse, also originally read, "You say so," or "Am I?"
Yeah.
Then it goes on to say, "But in immediately confessing the Son of Man, will come again, etc. Coming with clouds of heaven. Jesus gives the high priest all he needs for condemnation.
There you go.
There's a note in the Oxford about that same verse that this signals the messianic power shift. Do you think that's referring to just what you were talking about, Bill, about the fact that now he's saying, I'm Christ?
Yeah,
Or is there-
without knowing the full context, I'm pretty sure that's what they're saying, that suddenly the whole time he has said, oh, I don't tell anybody, or even if I am, don't say anything about it. Like, he's very hidden. This is suddenly the revelation of that. I don't know if it's a power shift. It'd be interesting to know if there's more detail they had about what they mean by power shift, but it is a significant change of what Jesus said, or as Lynn's footnotes would say, a significantly different way of Jesus saying anything, right? To say I am, or to say yes, I'm the Messiah, is not where he's been the whole time. That's part of why I like Placker's comment that says part of why Jesus does it here is because you can't misunderstand what Jesus means in this moment, because he's not going to win, right? He's not going to become a military leader all of a sudden. It's not going to be that messianic expectation of overthrowing Rome or fixing the temple, or go down the list of expectations people had. It's, oh, he's declaring himself as the Messiah, the suffering servant, to be sure, which is not the expectation, right, for most who were ready for the Messiah to come. Which adds to that power and authority, that power shift. Perhaps there is the power shift. Is it suddenly a Messiah is not triumphant, but one condemned?
I just wonder if is God the Father basically the puppet master, if you will, behind everything that is happening to Jesus, behind the actions of the Romans, behind the actions of the Jews, that all of this had to happen in this way because God is behind it all.
Yeah, I mean, that's that sort of fate question, like how much does God control within it? But yeah, I mean, I think that's right. Is that what I hear you saying? Is sort of that if God's in control of the whole situation?
Yeah, if God is in control of the universe,
Right.
And everything that happens in it, then all of this came about because it's something that God wanted in the way that it happened.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the fundamental and big questions of this story, but also of human narrative too, right? Like, does God mean for a whole variety of good and bad events to happen across history? And I don't have an answer. Obviously, I mean, this is one that part of me says that certainly everything about this would be one that God seems to have set up to get to just this moment and just this way. But gosh, I
think that's
yeah.
debated a lot about Judas.
Mhm.
Did he make a choice, or was he just had to turn Jesus in because that's the way it was supposed to be and he had no choice? But God always gives us choices. So yeah, that's a big debate.
Yeah, there's lots within that, right? There's layers on layers of do we have free will in the midst of that, or does God just know the choices we're going to make, so allows it
Right.
to be made? is there a difference between those two things? Yeah, I want to believe that Jesus both, and God for that matter, empower us to make the decisions and give us the free will to make good or bad choices. But I also do have that belief that God knows us well enough to have a pretty good idea of which direction things are going to go. I don't know.
God doesn't step in to keep terrible things from happening in the world. So I guess there's no reason to think he would have done that when Jesus was being arrested.
Right.
But do you think the resurrection would have had less impact if Jesus had died in some other way? Probably. I mean, this is pretty dramatic.
It's pretty dramatic. I don't know. I mean, if Jesus had a Viking funeral, it'd be a very different and dramatic response, right? If they had burned him on a pyre in the middle of the Adriatic or something like that, or the Mediterranean, then that'd be a different feeling too, right? Death is pretty dramatic unto itself. I don't know if it has to be more or less dramatic. I don't know. Yeah, the what ifs of this text in Scripture. I'm gonna stop the shared. Because that's it for this week. Next Thursday we will meet. It's Holy Week, but the good thing is usually the days are pretty quiet, so we'll just plan on being together and crossing the bridge for the sort of last, which is the next we have the trial with Pilate and the crucifixion, which seems an appropriate thing to be reading on Monday, Thursday, to say the least. So we'll look at all that next week, my friends. Any other thoughts, comments we want to make before we finish up for today?
Heavy stuff. Okay. I would not say I'm feeling good right now. Does that make any sense at
Yeah.
all?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like there's a weight sitting on me right now.
Right. Well, I would say good. It's supposed to be a bit of a weight. It's not. You should not read this text and go, "Oh, that was nice."
Yeah.
I mean, this is.
Yeah.
You should feel the weight of really big situation and choice and death and sacrifice. It's all caught up in it, right? But it's also then why Easter is glorious on the other side. If you don't have that weight or that heaviness and engage it, then Easter's pretty cheap.
I mean, we stopped right before Peter's denial, but I think, you can take some solace with Peter.
Amen. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know him. Okay. I can. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. All right.
All right, my friends. Have a good day, and we will see you Sunday, if not before.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Good to see you, buddy.
Bye.